working or have any activities with NGOs, with other civil society groups, academia or found community groups, then we'd love to know about it. Drop it on our NGOC Facebook, and it'll go out to our network, which has quite a strong following here in the Philippines.
Okay, next question.
First question is, you are creating apps targeting the youth and the people who are inclined to poverty. Is that correct?
Go ahead. Next question. I'll answer both of them the same.
Okay. And the next question is, if you are targeting the youth and the people who are impoverished and so on and so forth, how do you expect them to have access to this type of stuff?
Yeah. Let me answer your first question. And I want everyone to really understand this, because it's kind of important for observation. We're not trying to build anything. Okay? We don't have an agenda to get all of you to build applications for the ADB. The ADB is not buying applications. Microsoft is not buying applications. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to expose all of you to opportunities that exist in the region where you can build applications that solve, social, economic development needs, that address issues like youth or address issues like governance, etc. Because we believe there is a tremendous money-making opportunity for you as software developers to build applications for these things. So we're exposing you to a wide variety of different areas to stimulate your ideas, to give you something that you might think is interesting and you want to pursue it. So from there, your applications will then get exposed using channels like Microsoft and the partners that are with us in this effort, as well as the ADB. You'll get exposed to that billions and billions of people that live in this region. That's really the purpose of this. So the second part of your question is, what do you do about access issues? And that's a fair question also. We can't flip a switch and say everyone will have universal access to the internet and to broadband, and not everybody is necessarily going to be able to consume what you produce, right? That's just a fact of the world right now. The broadband penetration is not everywhere. So part of your thinking in developing your solution is how are you going to address that? How are you, as the solution developer, the innovator, how are you going to create an app that's going to be useful to people who may not necessarily have access to the internet? Right?
Not to the internet, to those devices themselves.
So
like if you're in rural areas, they don't have a lot of.
That's exactly right. But there are people who are in rural areas who do have access to it. There are people in urban areas that have access to smartphones. A lot of people at varying degrees of economic level have access to the technology, but not all. Right? You have to be thinking about that in terms of how you're going to approach your solution as well.
One way that we've also pointed out in the site is, as a suggestion, is work with civil society organizations who work with those younger people, those civil society organizations would have access to these types of devices and maybe help them do their jobs better.
So there's one in the back.
Actually, I have more of a question of what is ADB looking for? From what I'm seeing, the examples are mostly enabler programs. These are in help of logistics for getting data around to enable other programs. Or are you looking for end-to-end solutions, for example, using applications but also have a plan for deployment, have a plan for solving certain problems. Isn't that going to be a better way of actually dealing with these problems rather than just looking for an application that just does logistics and the problem will still be there? And that's the logistics, the data, I think ADB already has that. So we're not really solving any problems here, but we're just giving you another tool to use.
Well, once again, we're not building applications for the ADB. Right? We're not. Now, the ADB funds projects that use IT. Governments spend money on projects that use IT. Okay, but this is not the ADB's IT requirements that we're communicating to you. Does everyone understand that?
Yes.
Okay. This is us telling you here's a sampling of the needs in the world. Right.
So the question basically is, are you looking just for the maker software, or are you looking into other solutions, as in frameworks that can try to solve these problems? I attack some procedural ways, or deployment of certain devices, actually implement this in certain areas. How many people are
Can be
deployed, things like that.
it can be any of those things, right? Because it's you who's going to come up with the idea for a solution to a problem, right? Okay, it's going to produce a business viable software application that you can then sell to people who want to buy it. Some of that might be the governments that are investing in IT. Some of them would be governments that ADB is funding projects on. Maybe not. Some of it will be just selling it to the general public. So it's really kind of once you sort of identify what problem set you want to go after and what problems you want to solve, then figure out what kind of solution you're going to build around that. So it could be any of those things you mentioned. Yeah. Okay? Does that make sense to everyone? Any other questions? Okay.
I'd like to add some information about your questions. That question was pointed to ADB, I think. Probably it's more of the how should be pointed to the developer, to the solution provider. And as a member of an NGO organization in Iloilo, there are actually places that are not accessible. I mean, there's no broadband connections, but there are people working around there that gets this information, and this information will be available. This is a public document, and I think as a developer, it is already your technique or your tactics to be able to gather those information and be able to integrate that in your apps. So that's just it.
Maybe coming to this hackathon, I was expecting that I had the mindset that ADB was here to partner with Microsoft so that you could have ideas of how to solve the problems that you presented using IT solutions. And so I also had this expectation that ADB was the one going to fund how these IT solutions will be implemented. So I think based on your explanation earlier, so this is not the case that you will be finding a way how you could implement the solutions, because that was the case. Maybe one problem there is who will be the one to fund providing for handheld devices or any other IT devices to those poor countries, and as well as implementing a better internet broadband connectivity.
No, and again, we're trying to communicate to all of you what our opportunities are for you to build solutions that are software applications that you can sell, right? The people in the region want to buy, okay? We're not funding that. You know, that if you choose to participate in Apps for Asia, you're doing it because you're an entrepreneur, because you want to build an application that there's a potential market for. Our role is to introduce you to that market, okay? And the way that we've done that is we're using the broad reach of the ADB, which have access to, you know, a couple billion people in the world, right? 67 countries that represent potential markets, you know, thousands of government agencies, etc., that are going to get, that you're going to have access to, your apps are going to be exposed to, right? And people will, hopefully, if you build a good application and you solve a problem and there's a demand for it, you're going to sell software. You're going to sell your application. That's really the point of what we're doing here. So, you know, again, ADB's not buying anything. ADB and Microsoft are not funding anything here, other than the fact that, you know, there's a contest and the winners of the contest get to go to the ADB meeting and have their technology showcased. But that's as far as we're doing this. After the applications are all built, we're going to be helping you to market them through Microsoft's channels, through access to the ADB network, because people will be very interested in the types of solutions you've developed. All that will be an ongoing thing, and eventually all of your applications will become part of a bigger brand, which is Apps for Asia. And that's really what we're trying to achieve here. Make sense? Okay. So we're not funding handsets. We're not funding broadband. We're not doing anything. Huh? Basically, we're helping you market.
Couple of sort of development comments. You know, why aren't we investing in this? And we are partnering. We're seeing opportunities here. We're excited about it. But what does ADB do with its money? Where are we investing? Where are our priorities? ICT in the region is exploding. We don't have to stoke it up. There are more telephones in Asia Pacific than there are toilets. There are 600 million people who openly defecate in Asia. There are bigger problems out there below the poverty line that we're investing money. But we do see innovative niches and would like to use our knowledge to any private sector initiatives, or whether they're profit or social enterprise based, it doesn't matter. You know, we're excited about this. We know it's got great potential, but we will be very careful where actual specific dollar investment.
Yeah, I just want to point out, it's another response to your question about access to devices and access to the internet. I think, as was mentioned by Mr. Chris Morris, mobile phone penetration is actually very, very high, even in countries like the Philippines and Indonesia. I think the current rate is about 70%, 80% penetration. We're pretty high up there. The thing is, the majority of the population don't have smartphones.